Well, good morning from Hopalong Hollow. This is Jerry. I wanted to do a couple little updates on the last video. First of all, I wanted to show you how this rose has been reviving. This was the one that I thought had some sort of a disease, but it seems to be recuperating really nicely, except that there are a few bugs eating it, and those would be aphids. Well, we'll take care of that pretty quick. Also, take a look at the little hollyhocks that are just going wild in the garden. These are the Sabrina. You get a much better look at the Sabrina hollyhock now that it's in full bloom. I almost think I like these better than the full-size hollyhocks. They're not quite so majestic, but they certainly put out a lot of blooms. I had to show you this hollyhock that just grew in the middle of the sidewalk. Must have been a little stray seed from off the porch when I was putting them in the trays. And it's about 6 foot tall, actually probably 7 foot tall, yeah. Towering over my head, but what a beauty she is. Just look at that. Yeah, the big ones are pretty majestic, I must say. Here's the Beatrix Potter Patch with the yellow evening primrose starting out its bloom. And everything is growing pretty nicely. The foxglove are not as tall as they should have been, but they're biennials. This is their first year, so I'm surprised they even bloomed. But next year they'll be bigger. So this is looking pretty good right now. I wanted to show you an experiment I conducted on my foxglove. When they first got a stem full of buds, I chopped it off right there to see what would happen. And what happened was, it started to do what most plants do. It filled out beneath that cut. And instead of getting one spiral of bloom, I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4 spirals of blooms. Now granted, it's not that majestic and tall, but I'm getting a lot more flowers. And I did it on almost all of these foxglove here on this hill. And every single one of them is producing many, many different stems of foxglove. So it was an experiment that actually worked out pretty well. So here's another one where I cut off the main blooming stem, and out of that are branching 5 separate blooming stems. Now they don't get as tall and majestic as they normally would, but you get a lot more flowers this way. And they're just shorter. The plants will be much shorter. This video we left off here at the front yard garden, and I'm back here just to show you the beautiful Queen Anne's lace in full bloom. It's looking so beautiful. This is why I love it in a garden. Yes, it takes over. Yes, it's a wildflower. Yes, some may consider it a weed, but I don't. I don't think anything's a weed if you love it in your garden. We're not really going to concentrate on this garden today. I just wanted to show you the Queen Anne's lace and that things are growing pretty nicely in here. Thus far, penstemons, the dahlias, liatris, we've even got a few little lupins here in the front. I just stuff my gardens full because when this grows, I just want every square inch to be taken up with plants. And that does happen in the gardens, and that's fine with me because it does choke out the weeds. I just wanted to give you a nice look at how gorgeous and wonderful those bellflowers are doing. They're starting to open up, not really blue, more like purple, but that'll do. That works out too for me. So this bed is still covered in wire, but I'll be able to remove that wire very soon. If I could just trust my dogs not to lay in here. Today's challenge is this long, thin garden bed that runs along another path outside the potager at the back of the house. Now the only thing in this garden at the moment is the pussy willow bush, which I've pruned down quite a bit because I want more sun in here. This was producing a little bit too much shade for what I want. And then I also have a row of sedum here, which I liberated from the Beatrix Potter Patch before I put that in. So I have a nice sedum hedge here, which will grow nicely. And then I have all this space, which right now is full of creeping Jenny. And that's it, just creeping Jenny. And the remains of what was the low tunnel, which I took down. Used it over the winter, but I don't need it anymore. So what am I going to do with this long section? I just have to think about that. When you're clearing out weeds, especially persistent ones, to create a new garden bed, make sure that you get the roots. Now this is creeping Jenny, and it's one of our most persistent ground covers that comes into every single garden that I have. And it's beautiful. They sell it in garden centers, but it really does take over this garden or every other garden if I don't keep it in check. So when I'm digging it up, even the slightest little bits of root like that will create more creeping Jenny. So it's very tedious to get in here and try to get all the roots, and I never will get all the roots. There's just not a chance that I can. But at least I can minimize the problem when they start to come back. Another way to do this is to do the no-dig method, where you just cover your soil with cardboard and just let all the undergrowth just die, and then cover that in compost. But in this case, I've got a really terrible clay bed here, and I'm really trying to work in some sand and compost into this soil because it just doesn't drain very well as is. So I'm not using the no-dig method here, but I have used it in several of the other gardens over the years. I'm curious what you have in your garden that is a persistent vine or weed or whatever you want to term it. Ours are creeping Jenny, for sure. Creeping Jenny. Violets, I have a love-hate relationship with violets. They are beautiful with heart-shaped leaves and beautiful little purple spring flowers. But my goodness, they have a tendency to just plant themselves everywhere. They're easy to pull up. That's the good thing about the violets. It's just a matter of trying to get up as many roots as you can and turning your soil, in this case, into some really nice, well-draining soil. Not too many plants like to grow in clay. Not everything needs a very nutritious soil, though, either, so some plants just thrive on bad soil. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with these plants, let me show you. You might have them in your garden too. Here is the lovely creeping Jenny, and it just travels around along the ground in moist areas, sun areas. I mean, it's pretty happy no matter where it is. It produces tiny little yellow flowers, and it actually is a beautiful ground cover. But you really have to keep this under control if you want your garden to thrive. This is another one that we get a lot of. This is the wild strawberry. And I think these are rather pretty. They do produce the little red strawberries. I don't have too much trouble with letting these grow in the gardens. And of course they are wild strawberries with tiny white flowers. And they like it basically in the shade. And then we have the ever-present Creeping Charlie. And the Creeping Charlie has a wonderful scent. It's part of the mint family, and you know what mints like to do. So this one has many different names. It was imported from Europe for a purpose. I can't remember why. I wrote about it on my blog one time. But it's got many different names. Ground Ivy, Creeping Charlie, Robin's Run, and several others. The good thing about Creeping Charlie is the roots are really shallow. So this is easy to pull, much easier than the Creeping Jenny. And then, of course, we've got the beautiful violet with the heart-shaped leaves, the little purple flowers, and they grow by rhizomes, but they also produce a lot of seed. And I'd say that they're 100% viable because I find them everywhere. I actually don't hate these in the garden. I think that sometimes you have to make friends with some of these plants, because unless you're growing a formal garden, Your garden is not going to be perfect, but you can use these to your advantage because they are lovely in sort of a living mulch under your plants. But they also pull up quite easily. So I'm starting here with a nice clear patch, but I'm pretty sure that within just a few weeks, these plants will be coming back into this garden. So it's just something that you live with. You don't have to fret over it. They're not going to kill your other plants. They might try to overpower them, but just don't let them. There you see. Just look at all that clay. And it just rained, and you can see how it's just hanging onto all that water. But if you work in the compost very nicely, you can get some nice, rich, well-drained soil to plant anything in. And plants will really appreciate that. Here are the maidens preparing the soil for me. You see, this is what they love to do when you put down fresh compost. So basically I put it down, I let them do their thing. They get the soil nice and fluffy, and then it's easy to put in seeds and new bedding plants. And then after that, I have to protect the soil from them. So that's why I put up all those barricades. They're just temporary. Once gardens are established, the chickens have absolutely no interest in them at all. Edie is the orange one here, and she had these beautiful eyeliner eyes like an Egyptian when she was a chicklet. They were just incredible. Of course, she's lost them now because they're surrounded by the red. But she looked just like a little Egyptian princess. When I moved into this property 30 years ago, this old wheelbarrow was back in the hollow, just with a bunch of other garbage. I have no idea how old it is. It's pretty rusty and rotten, but I thought it would look great with sweet potatoes in it. So it has a special place in this garden. And then along the edge here, our golden squash and one hollyhock. Just guessed from last year. A little surviving hollyhock. I think it's black. I hope so. And here we have some more sweet peas. So this is going to be a very interesting garden bed with fruits, vegetables, and of course glorious flowers, annuals and perennials. I mentioned my lack of blueberry expertise in the last video because I wasn't getting any blueberries off that particular bush, and you all gave me lots of good advice. Many of you said you have to have more than one blueberry bush, and it's preferable if it's a different kind. Well, actually there are 5 dwarf blueberry bushes in that potager, so that wasn't the problem. It could be that the soil wasn't acidic enough, but then on the other hand, I always put a lot of compost in my soil. So I decided that I would get some more blueberries because I'm determined to have a good blueberry production. Maybe it won't be this year, but next year. So we got 5 blueberry plants, and within 10 feet of these are the other blueberry plants, which are different. So these say they're self-pollinating, but who knows. These are, what are they called? Emerald blueberries. I'm going to take this section here, which was growing raspberries, but I'm moving the raspberries to another place. This is full sun all day long. I'm going to fix this soil with peat and compost. That should make it pretty acidic. And I've also got 3 comfreys growing in here. So I think that this should be a pretty good area for blueberries. Well, here we go again. Now you understand why I need wire protectors everywhere. So tomorrow, after I've got this entire thing planted, I'll put a wire fence all the way around it. until it's established. And when it's established, they won't even want to go into it. They won't care anymore. Now we've got a nice cleaned out bed, beautiful soil, sunny location. It's perfect canvas or watercolor paper to create your new garden, or my new garden in this case. So let's just say you're starting a new garden and you want to know what to do with it. Well, there's just a couple of things you have to think about. Do you want your garden to have a theme? Do you want a formal garden or a country garden or a cottage garden? Is it an herb garden, a vegetable garden, or a combination of all? Will it be a rose garden? There's just so many places to go from here. And that's where the fun comes in, and the planning, because it is good to get out a pad of paper and decide what plants you want to put in here and what is it that you're trying to accomplish in this particular space, whatever your space is. I'm not a formal garden person, so this is definitely a country cottage garden as always, but I still have a plan. I still have goals and something I want to do. I don't just want to haphazardly throw plants in hither and thither. I mean, once they're in there, they will do what they want, and that's fine. But I do want to start out with some sort of an idea of what's going to go on in this garden. Obviously, with my using the timbers here and the old wheelbarrow and the bee haven and the old horse troughs and so on and so forth as containers for gardens, I am more of a rustic style, old world style garden. And I've already got a few plants in there because I didn't remove them. They were the rutabaga back there, which you can see brightly colored. I've got the hollyhock, which was existing already. And other than that, I've got a few things that I've already put in, and I've decided on what I want to accomplish. So, what do you want? Seeds? Do you want to use some seeds? Do you want some perennials, annuals? You want roots? You want a plant that is going to be happy in its circumstances. So if it's a shade lover, you certainly don't want to put it in a sun-loving spot. But most plants really do want the sun. And so you have so many opportunities and so many choices available. Another major choice that you're going to make is your colors. Are you wanting bright colors, yellows, reds, oranges? Do you want the blues, the pinks, the pastels, the whites? Or do you want a combination of all? So thinking about bloom time, color, height, soil conditions, and everything that I have in this particular spot, I write down every plant, and then I decide how I'm going to incorporate it into the garden. Of course, you could chuck all those plans and just decide to turn your patch into a wildflower garden, which is pretty easy to do. Get yourself a bag or a can of wildflower seed and just sprinkle your whole patch with wildflower seed. I must confess, I only bought this wildflower seed because I loved the graphics on the can. I just thought it was so funny, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I'm definitely going to keep the can, and maybe I'll toss this wildflower seed on the slope garden, which is pretty much a wild garden anyway. So what I decided for this garden is drama. I want a really dramatic looking garden by using deep, rich reds for one thing. And to get the reds, I'm using the cherry brandy rutabaga, that deep red dianthus, also known as Sweet William, and that 80-inch Velvet Queen sunflower. Those are my dark, dark red colors. But I'm mixing them with something a little unusual, pale pastel colors, such as zinnias, pale zinnias, yarrow, forget-me-nots, a very pale bergamot, and a very pale penstemon. And then this is not in the garden, but this is the color of some fantastic zinnias that I found, which are just a pale yellow, and some are white, and some are actually green zinnias. And those I planted as seed. And then also the little yellow cosmos are sort of this color too. So this is going to be a lot of similar colors, such as the pinks and the lavenders, but because the leaves and the stems and the heights and the flower shapes are different, This will just make a beautiful medley of harmonious confusion, one of my very, very favorite things. And then I didn't plant love in a mist, but I did plant some blue sea holly. And I planted it right behind a pom-pom honeycomb dahlia. This is not it, but it's very much this color. And so I thought these two colors together should be absolutely striking. And of course, the height of the sunflowers, you've got to have sunflowers. 80 inches for the sunflowers up against the back wall. I had collected a lot of seed from my last garden last year, so I was very happy to have that red dianthus, and I've got the yellow dwarf lemon cosmos, which I have used up now. And this is the purple hyacinth bean, and I'm wondering where could I use that? Possibly I could put that on the cattle panel. But I've also got little bitty sugar pumpkins growing up that cattle panel, so you can't have too many flowers in your garden. And if you mix and match colors and you experiment a little bit, you might come up with some fantastic color combinations. And you know, if you don't like them together, you can always dig up the plant and move it somewhere else. I do that all the time. So we'll see what happens in this garden. I'm thinking it could be a pretty dramatic garden, and I just can't wait to see what happens in here. This end, all along the back, we will have those deep Velvet Queen sunflowers going as tall as 80 inches in front of those zinnias, bergamot, and in front of that rudbeckia. And then in the very front, we're going to have a lot of the little dwarf pale yellow cosmos and the deep red sweet William. So what I mostly planted in here are seeds, so that's why it looks very barren right now. But I also had several roots that I put in and several little baby plants that I had grown in the little greenhouses. In order to prevent the wild birds from coming and eating all the seeds that I planted in here, I am using black sunflower seeds as a decoy here in this bird feeder. Here and many other feeders in the yard, just to keep them away from my garden seeds while they get a chance to germinate. Hello. Hello, boys and girl. This is Lydia, Solomon, and Stella. Bye-bye. So from henceforth, this shall be known as the Maidens Garden. The maidens being the hens, because they helped cultivate the garden, and because some of the flowers that I planted are very much like their colors. Especially that sunflower. Looks just like Prudy. This is Demelsa. And there are a few little white flowers in there for Peggy. Bishop's flower. And a few white zinnias. Well, it's been a few days since we put this garden bed in, and it looks like, well, it looks like an empty garden bed, pretty much. Just remember, this is how they all start out. Even the great gardens of the world start out as an empty patch. And sometimes we have a tendency to compare our gardens with other people's, and our gardens often fall far short of those glorious, world-famous gardens that we see online, or that we have all visited. It's great to get inspiration from other people's gardens and wonder at how glorious they are, and sometimes we tend to think, well, I'll never be able to have a garden like that. But you know what? Don't compare your garden to anybody else's. You put as much love and tenderness and care in your garden as anybody else, the most famous gardeners of the world. Just remember, no matter whether you have a tiny little patch of plants, a window box, or a vast, vast acreage full of flowers, your garden is a personal thing. And if we compare our gardens to other people's, we will always be unhappy because, let's face it, we're going to fall short of our expectations of what our garden should do, but let's just take joy in the fact that it always surprises us. And this little somewhat barren patch right now is doing all sorts of wonderful things right now. I mean, I get close down in here and I can see those little cosmos seeds are germinating, and back there we have so many sunflowers germinating and zinnias germinating. And I mean, I am as guilty as anybody in looking at a marvelous and incredible garden and thinking, I could never have a garden like that. But I don't have to have a garden like that. Just love your garden that you have. Gardens don't have to be all things to all people. In other words, we don't have to have a cutting garden and a dried flower garden and an herb garden and a rose garden. We don't have to have all those things. If you've just got a small space, concentrate on one plant. Do you love succulents? Just look up everything you can about succulents. Plant a succulent garden. You can do those in pots. Or maybe you love a particular plant, such as penstemon. There are so many penstemons. You could just have a garden full of penstemons and roses. So concentrate on what you love and create the garden of your dreams, not somebody else's. Missing. A simple country bouquet on your table really makes a difference. It's just a few picked flowers fresh from the garden, easily displayed in any kind of a vase or jar. Doesn't have to be anything elaborate or fancy, but it really makes a difference on the table. Today's dinnerware is Port Marion or Port Marion Botanical Gardens, made in England. We've showed this before. It's just each plate has a beautiful rendition of a garden flower, telling you the classical name for it and the scientific name. Here we have the garden lilac, or the Syringa vulgaris. I like the garden lilac better. If you love soup, but it's really hot outside, Gazpacho is the way to go. This is really delicious. This is a little bit spicy, and it's actually served cold, so it's just cold vegetable soup with black beans and ham and a little bit of spice. You can make it as spicy as you like, so it's so refreshing and so delicious and so healthy. I found the recipe for this in an old magazine that I had, and it was just full of soup recipes. If you like really substantial muffins and you like a really grainy whole grain bread, these are delicious. And they're really good because of that milled corn flour. Now, if you like it a little more fine, then use a different kind of corn flour. But these are just very healthy and filling. Really, really great. And I got the recipe from the Essential Home Ground Flour book by Sue Becker. And we're drinking strawberry banana smoothies with our meal today. Nice and cold on ice. And this beautiful, beautiful casserole dish is from, you know, my favorite Portugal pottery maker, Bordalo Pinheiro. Back to this little space in the morning when the light's a little bit different, and I'll show you a little bit about this courtyard space and the garden that I'm going to be working on next. Here we are the next morning in the same garden spot, and I'm going to take a look at my courtyard floor. And I'm going to say, wow, this is a lumpy, bumpy courtyard, but it's something I've come to appreciate. It doesn't have to be perfection for me. I love perfectly imperfect, especially for an old house like this. So these old bricks were laid in between this concrete slabs, which was broken up concrete that was laid here in the 1960s. So this is 60-year-old concrete. And I like that. I don't mind the cracks. I don't mind the stains. I don't have to have a perfect cobblestone courtyard here. It's just learning to love what you've got and work with what you've got. You've got on hand, and just being imaginative and creative with your space, you can really learn to appreciate what you've got, whether it's a small garden plot or just a crazy courtyard like this. Every time I come outside, I add a couple more sprigs of flowers to that vase, so now it's got little Zabrina hollyhocks, larkspur, foxglove, nigella pods, and a couple little sweet peas in there. So it seems to get a little bit fuller every time I film it. I alluded in the last video to a project that I've been working on for a few years. And as many of you know, I make my living as an artist. I have many outlets for my artwork as far as medium. I do fiber, needle-felted fiber animals. I also do painted paper cutting and Scherenschnitt. I do scratched eggs. I also do storybooks. And I had been working on a storybook, which is actually a garden book for beginner children gardeners. For the last couple years, I've been doing the illustrations whenever time permitted. The initial idea was to use the animals that live here in Hopalong Hollow as my little gardeners. This is covered in plastic because it is sprinkling outside. So here you see the maidens in the garden. I call this Ladies in Lavender. But the initial idea for the book was to teach kids the basics of gardening and what I call Hopalong Hollow scaping. But my ideas have evolved over the years because I wouldn't want this to just be a children's book. And it's not just a gardening book, because there are millions of gardening books out there done by master gardeners and real professionals, unlike myself. So I want this to be something very, very, very different and unique. By combining my love of gardening, which is a hobby, and my profession as an artist, I wanted to do some full color illustrations, great big illustrations, because I like to do big books, with all the gardeners being animals. The professional gardeners in my book are the animals that live here in Hopalong Hollow. So Fiona Goosefeathers, and Bushki Bushy Bottom, and Hopalong Jack, and all the maidens. I'm going to give tips and tricks in how to create a Hopalong Hollow scaping garden. So I'll be incorporating many of the animals here in Hopalong Hollow, both wild and domestic. So I've actually steered away from the idea of just making this a storybook for children, or how-to book for children. I want it to be an everybody book, for amateur gardeners, for kids, and for anybody. It should be a garden book that would appeal to anybody that loves animals, flowers, gardens, and an old-fashioned approach to gardening and landscaping. Combination of original artwork, these will all be painted of course, and photographs from the gardens here, from start to finish, realistic things that you can actually copy and apply to your own garden. If you're anything like me, you already have dozens and dozens and dozens of garden books put out by the very, very best gardeners. But what would you like to see in a garden book that you haven't seen before? That's my question for you. Or is there anything new in the world of gardening books? I don't know. I'm certainly going to explore it. I'll be incorporating all of our favorite cottage flowers, our antique flowers that we love, how to grow them, especially if you're a beginner gardener. I've always intended for this piece to be the book cover. And the title of the book will most likely be Hopalong Hollow Scaping. Long road ahead in finishing up the painting on these illustrations and getting all the photographs together. But in the meantime, I really would like your input on the sort of ideas that you'd like to see in a gardening book. So from Hopalong Hollow, this is Jerry, and we'll see you next time in this little garden right here. Bye.